number one slide that every investor spends time on is the team slide. Who are the founders? Who are these people? The number two slide is the business model. Like, how are you going to make money? And after that, it goes down very significantly. So all those slides about this is going to be a giant market in 5 years, what I tell people to do in their presentation is to focus around the funding window and what you're going to achieve. You should have a slide in there that shows in 5 years it's going to be a big market, but that doesn't matter. The more important slide is what's your business model? What's your operational plan for the next 12 to 18 months that is going to get you into the market?
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that has started several businesses and grown them to 7- and 8-figure companies, as well as the CEO and founder of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. And today we have another great guest on the podcast, and this is an expert episode, so even more special, which is Martin, and I think it's Tobias. Is that how I say the last name?
Yep.
All right. So Martin is going to share a little bit, everything about money. So money is always important to startups, always a question on startups' minds or small businesses. So how do you raise money? What investors are looking for? How to do a pitch? What are some companies that get invested in and other companies that don't get invested in? How to talk with authority to investors and whatever else we happen to dive into as the podcast goes on. So with that, welcome onto the podcast, Martin.
Thanks for having me, Devin.
So maybe before we dive into the topics that I just ran through, give everybody just a quick intro on yourself and kind of your background and why you're such an expert on this episode or on this topic.
I guess it's because I've just been doing it a long time. I'm one of these serial entrepreneurs who started my first entrepreneurial thing at 6 years old. I had a Kool-Aid stand outside my house, which was near the University of Florida. I saw a business opportunity because everybody on Sundays would walk to the football games from the parking lot past my house. I'm like, wow, I could make money. And I got hooked on entrepreneurship. And I've started a bunch of companies, been CEO of 3 of them. And I've also been on the investor side. I've been a venture partner at Ignition Partners, which is a $2 billion fund out of Seattle. I'm a limited partner in 12 funds. I've raised over $500 million for my own companies, including 2 IPOs. And I've invested in over 150 companies as an angel investor or a venture investor. So I've been on both sides of it. And recently, sort of in the last 6 months, I've decided to go back and focus on angel investing and investing with my friends to add value to startups. Because frankly, personally, I like the early stage, the sort of, first 3 or 4 people under 50 employees, because that's where all the fun is. That's where people are willing to take risks. That's where you can get better returns financially. And I just really enjoy working with startup founders and, adding any value that I can. And I've been through the cycle quite a few times. One of the things I've seen recently is there's a lot of people jumping in every cycle, near the top. But I've been through the downturn of the .com bust. I've been through the bust of clean tech and a couple of other cycles. And that perspective can be helpful a lot of times to young entrepreneurs as well.
No, and I think that, I was smiling and almost kind of reflecting because a lot of different type of job, but a lot of the reason I started Miller IP Law was for the same thing. I like to work with the startups, the small businesses, the ones that there's just an extra layer of excitement of, hey, we're doing something new, something that, we find exciting. They're excited about it. They want to share, they want to build. And it just kind of adds that extra layer that's, enjoyable and fun, as opposed to when you work with a bigger business, they're a little bit more, they've established themselves. They know what they're doing. They have their products, and this is kind of building on what they've done rather than starting something new. So I think that I share the same level of excitement that you do on a lot of that from a different perspective. So now with that, now that we've talked a little bit about you, let's talk a little bit about what we want to talk about in the experts episode, which is now how do we go and raise money, right? So I always like to joke, but I think there's a lot of truth to it, that startups always have more things to spend money on than money to spend. They're always in kind of that conundrum of, should I spend it on new employees? Should I spend it on new equipment? Should I spend it on intellectual property? Should I spend it on development and R&D and software? And should I do independent contractors? And so they've got all, and not to mention a building and facility. So they've got all these demands on if they really want to make a go of it. They need to have, they'll have to have some money, and yet there isn't ever enough. So you're always kind of bootstrapping and figuring that out. So with that, with always having those demands on money, give us a little bit of insight. What is kind of the ways that investors can start looking at raising money, how they might want to raise money, and what their options might be?
Well, I've looked at this from both sides, and frankly, the constraint of not having enough money is a good one, because then you have to make choices. And you're forced to make choices and to decide between relative probabilities and relative options, which is a good thing. In the dot-com boom, and even in some startups that I see now, when they become overfunded, these companies that raise $100 million, if you take the money pressure off and you start buying Herman Miller chairs and stuff like that, all of a sudden you're WeWork, and it can be a bad incentive if you have too much money. So frankly, I think having constrained money is a good thing. The way I think about it as an investor, and the way I've always thought about it as a CEO, is that I always want to raise basically twice as much money as I think I need for the next logical milestone in my business. And if you think about, I don't know if you're a poker player, I'm a poker player as well. And poker is a game of incomplete information. You have two cards, you have no idea what anybody else has, you have no idea what's going to come. And you have to make a decision to put money to work given the incomplete information. And you put some money in, you get a little more information, then you make another decision. And startups are exactly the same way. You have an idea, you might have some savings yourself, you might have your friends and family give you a little bit of money. You have to decide, given the money that we have, how much information can I buy, knowledge about, is this a good idea? Do customers want it? All the important things. And, what's the most efficient way to get that money, to get that information? But the real key to raising money is to ask the right questions that can be answered within your funding window. A startup, one of the things a lot of startups make a mistake on is, I talked to one yesterday and he's like, we have this 5-year plan and we think in 5 years, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I'm not giving you 5 years worth of money. What are you going to answer in the next year? And how does that move the story forward? So investors are willing to take risks if they know what questions are going to be answered given the amount of money. And the reason I always tell people to put a budget together and try to raise twice as much is because things always go wrong. So, let's say you are development stage and you haven't written your product, but you think that you can get 1,000 customers for a consumer product. Okay. How much is it going to cost to build the MVP and get those 1,000 customers? If that's $1 million, raise $2 million. But define the objectives of the financing round. And I see that as a common mistake a lot of startups make, is that they don't define for investors what they hope, the main 2 or 3 questions they hope to answer with this funding round. I see a lot of pitch decks which say, we're going to use it for general corporate purposes. Well, what does that mean? Beer parties.
Is that a salary? Is that a pay increase?
Salary. So they're like, we've been working without pay, so we're going to start paying ourselves. I go, that's good for you, but as an investor, how does that answer the question of, is this a good business? Do customers want to buy it? Can you build the product? The key questions in a startup is, have you identified a gap in the market? Is there a product that can be built to fulfill a customer need? And then will customers buy it? And can you reach those customers at a cost-effective way? And then the question after that is, can you scale acquiring those customers in a cost-effective way? Those are the main questions in any startup. And they come in normal, chunks. And so when you're raising money, you should say, okay, what stage am I at? What chunks am I going to answer? And you do not try to answer any question that takes you more than a year or 18 months to answer.
And I think that,
a 5-year fishing expedition.
And I like that because I think
Go
that
ahead.
even as a startup, you're not, I think life in general is hard enough to figure out where you're going to be at in 5 years. And then you take the dynamics of a startup and where it's likely, it's going to be near impossible to really know where you're going to be at in 5 years, unless you're so niche and exception of the exception to the rule. And so I like the idea of really what you should be doing is doing more bites, I don't know, sizable chunks of saying, now the next year, 18 months, this is what we're going to spend it on. This is what we're going to accomplish. This is how we're going to use the money. Now I want to ask a couple of questions on that kind of come up, that come up with people I work with in that. One is on, so let's say you are in startup mode, right? So you're a startup, a small business, you have a great idea, you maybe have a product development a bit, and you've been bootstrapping it. And you can show that, hey, we have a plan, here's the next 12 to 18 months. And oh, by the way, I've never taken a salary and I've never taken a dime out of the business, and I'm funding this as a side hustle. And if I go to investors and say, hey, part of what I want to do is I want to give myself a salary so I can work on this full time. Is that a pro or a con or indifferent to an investor in the sense that they say, well, I don't want all my money going towards a salary because then it's not going towards product development? Or they can argue, on the other hand, if you're only working on this as a side hustle, we're never going to get it done and it's going to die in the vine. So how do you what do you think as you're going into and talking with investors, how do you address that?
As an investor, I always want to see the company's expenses be fully funded. I can't tell you how many companies I've seen early stage that say we're profitable, on $50,000 a month of revenue. And I go, are you paying yourself? And they say, no. And I go, well, then you're not profitable. This is not a real business. You cannot scale that business. So as an investor, I want to see all the expenses in there. And I do not want to see people part-time. I just passed on a company yesterday where, the CEO was paying themselves and the developer was an outsourced contractor. And it was primarily a technology company building technology, and the technology employees were not employees of the company. And he gave me a budget which assumed that they remained contractors. And I said, well, then I'm not investing in the people that are building the core asset that you say is valuable. I can't fund the company. So, I want to see the salaries in there, and I want to see them fully burdened. I do want to see them, reasonable. Every time I take a job as a CEO, I pay myself less than a normal CEO because you're getting, stock options, but you have to be paid something. And, that's one area to look at as an investor is, are they underpricing any of the expenses? And at some point you have to pay everybody what they're worth, or, and if you can't afford to pay people based on the revenue, you don't have a business. So
no, and I think that I like that an answer, and that's kind of where I always fall is, if you're going to show this is what it takes to get it done, then show what it takes to get it done. And if you're showing that we're not going to take a salary for the next year and a half, well, either you're not going to really be invested in and working on it because you're going to be doing your full-time job and side hustle. And then to your point, if we don't even have the key players that we can afford to pay them, they're not going to stick around for very long. So one other question,
and I will never fund anybody that's doing something as a side hustle. Things might start as a side hustle, but if I fund somebody, this has to be their only hustle. One of my themes is that, the founders have to be really committed. I just funded these three guys 2 weeks ago, and it's a GPT-3 email client. And the guy told me a story. The first time he found this GPT-3 client, he and his two co-founders stayed up for 3 days drinking Diet Coke and didn't sleep, and built the MVP in 3 days of no sleep. And I'm like, those are guys I want to fund. Those are guys who are working, 24 hours a day. They didn't ask for salaries, nothing. They just did it. And, now what they wanted was money so that they could quit their and do what they loved and were doing on the side for free full time.
No, and that's certainly a convincing story. And I think that, and we'll address in just a minute of how to talk authentically. I did have one more question before we kind of move on to another topic, which is, So you talk about friends and family around, which is oftentimes when you're wanting to get starting, if you can't necessarily, you're not ready to go investors, you're not at that stage or something of that nature, you'll go to either dip into your personal savings, maybe use a credit card. And if you can't do that or that's insufficient, you'll go to friends and family, say, hey, I've got a great idea. You'll go pitch them and they'll come on board. Now, as an investor, and as you're going out seeking money, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And here, I'll give you the two arguments or things that I hear as to when people ask a question on both sides. On the one side, they're saying, friends and family, I don't want to go pitch them. I don't want to burden them. I don't want to have their money on the line, so to speak. So if this goes bad, I don't, when I see them at Christmas or Thanksgiving dinner, I don't have to worry about, did I get them their money back? And on the other hand, some of the times I hear is, getting friends and family and money around is beneficial to show to investors in the sense that they know you've got a lot of skin in the game because you don't want to fail when you go to Christmas or Thanksgiving and you don't want to let the family know. So how do you view that, or how do what's a way to reconcile or view that?
I view it as the latter one. If I see an entrepreneur who has not been able to convince anybody, including his parents, or her parents, to put money in before me, that's a bad sign. So, I want to see their money in, I want to see their time in, I want to see, some other people. And, as a professional investor, I don't want to be the first money in. I want to be the second money after, some amount of sweat equity from the founders or angel investments or friends and family investments. I mean, every company that I fund, has had $50, $100, $200,000 of investment before I see it. I very rarely write the very first check because if you have an idea and you can't convince even your friends or your family to give you money, it's probably not a very good idea.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. Now, I'll ask the flip side. Let's say you've been able to bootstrap it, or you don't have to go to friends and family. Should you go to friends and family first, or if you bootstrapped it to enough of a level, should they just go right to investors?
It depends on what they've done, and it depends on your balance sheet. Second and third time entrepreneurs who've made a little bit of money can bootstrap something themselves and don't need friends and family. I've funded guys like that, but I mean, they did put a lot of their own personal money into it before they did it. I mean, friends and family are not necessary. But you have, before you go to professional investors, at least for me, I don't know if you've seen it. There's a graph that, like, if the bottom left were, I wrote my idea on a napkin, and the top right is the thing IPO'd, there's stages all in between. And the stage where a professional investor is going to want to look at it is usually after you have an MVP, after you have had, this is for a software idea. I mean, this doesn't work for retail or maybe some other things. After you've had half a dozen to 10 customers and you've done some market validation. And so between MVP, first handful of customers, and market validation and the napkin, if you can do that without any financing, great. If you have to take a little friends and family, fine. But, the professional investor is unlikely to take that pre-MVP risk. Okay. Unless you're a second or third time founder.
Which then almost is you're investing as much on, hey, they've been successful, they built successful companies in the past and made an exit. Therefore, it gives you some credibility, which kind of segues into it. So I'm going to let you direct a little bit, but a couple of the other things I think would be interesting is, so you go into a pitch, and one thing is you want to talk authentically to the investors. And, so maybe speak a little bit about do's and don'ts of what matters in a pitch, what doesn't matter in a pitch. Should you have a long, here's all of a, and I'll say the thing I don't think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, as an example, things that you don't need to go do in a pitch and say, now this market is a $33 billion market. And if we just capture 1% of the market, and that's your whole plan, is all we got to do. Now, we don't know how we're going to capture 1%, but think about it. We only have to capture 1%. And generally, the feedback I've heard from different investors is, generally they want to hear how you're going to capture the market. They don't care if it's a 5 billion or 50 billion, but how do you go and capture the size of the market that matters to what your investment is? But maybe give us a bit of an idea of do's and don'ts and what matters in a pitch and what doesn't.
there's really only 2 or 3 things that matter to me in a pitch. And it's actually interesting. You can look at, there's a study online, people can look up the DocSend pitch deck statistics presentation. And, lots of people use pitch deck or DocSend to promote their pitch decks. They've got statistics on what slides investors pay attention to and percentage of time spent. The number one slide that every investor spends time on is the team slide. Who are the founders? Who are these people? The number 2 slide is the business model. Like, how are you going to make money? And after that, it goes down very significantly. So all those slides about this is going to be a giant market in 5 years. What I tell people to do in their presentation is to focus around the funding window and what you're going to achieve. You should have a slide in there that shows in 5 years it's going to be a big market, but that doesn't matter. The more important slide is what's your business model? What's your operational plan for the next 12 to 18 months that is going to get you into the market? What is your product, and what is the advantage your product has in the market that you believe will get you the first traction in the customers? And then the reason the team slide is important, and what you should spend most of your time talking about is why is this personal problem to you? Do you have an insight that other people don't have, and why can you deliver this thin edge of the wedge that's going to get these first customers? And what is your plan to do that, and how have you done that in the past? So the most important thing for CEOs to talk about in their presentation is, themselves, why this is a personal problem, what their plan is for the next 12 to 18 months, and what are the 2 or 3 questions they're going to answer with the investor money that is going to mean they have a more valuable company 12 to 18 months from now. Now, it's not going to be the end, but it is going to be something which can then either raise more money or do something else that is going to be useful. So all the slides, if you talk about anything in any of your slides that's a partner presentation and these quadrants, and we're up here and to the right, and 5 years from now, here's this hockey stick. I don't care about any of that. I don't care about financials beyond 18 months. I care about who are you, what is your approach to the market, why is it going to win, and why are you and your co-founders uniquely positioned to execute that plan.
So and I think that is incredibly insightful and helpful. Now, let me ask maybe one follow-up question. So let's say I am a solo guy, a startup guy. And so, I don't have a team yet. And maybe I'm saying, hey, to get the product developed, I don't really need a team. So for whatever reason, they haven't started a building team. They have a great idea. Maybe they've implemented it, started to reduce it to practice, but they haven't built that team. Would you suggest, hey, before you go in, that you should start building that team, bringing on additional people? Should you go to an investor? Kind of give me an idea, because, we get, whether it's one guy or a couple guys, a couple friends that are, hey, we've got a great idea. One guy's a marketing and sales, one guy's a product development or the coder, and they get to work on it, but they've never really spent time to build that team. When should they focus on building that team? Should it be from the start, right before we go to the investors, or can you do it without that full team?
It depends on the stage. If you have not built your MVP yet and have not gotten your first customers, sometimes all you need is a developer and a CEO that has business experience that can get the customers. You don't need an enterprise salesperson. But if you have your MVP, you have your first customers, and you're raising money to really get the next 50 customers, then you better know what your sales strategy is. Either you have a VP of sales or director of sales, or you have a recruiting process for them, or you are raising the money to get that person, and that's something you want from an investor as a referral to build the sales channel. I looked at a company, yesterday, 4 years in development, great technical founders, CEO who was able to get the first 10 customers, absolutely no enterprise sales experience. The product works, but they have no idea how to build an enterprise sales team. So they're raising a round of financing. So the question to answer in this round of financing is, can we take this product, which we built for the first couple customers, and get another 50 people to buy it?
Hmm.
And so in that case, the objective you're funding is hiring a sales team and scaling up sales.
Hmm.
And investors will do that. Investors that specialize in that stage. So it really depends on the stage and the questions you're trying to answer. You should have a plan. You don't have to have all the people, but you should be very open and honest and forthright with the investor into as far as who you don't have on the team that you believe will be critical to help you answer those questions which you're going to spend the money on. You don't have to have everybody, but you have to identify if you've got a hole. If this is all about consumer marketing and you don't have a consumer marketing person, you're like, the reason I need money is because I have to hire a consumer marketing person, and this is why I need the money. And investors will either say, great, you have enough traction and I love the product enough now that I'll fund that answering of that question and try to recruit someone, or not. But you should not oversell your capacity. You should be very honest about what you do have and what you don't have. And, typically that's what I see is a business person and a technical founder. But you also need a salesperson, a marketing person, customer support, all of these things.
So, I think that's certainly a very insightful and helpful as well. Now, one question I'd almost follow up on that is, it seems like some people are a bit reticent to point out the flaws in their business, right? They don't want to point out that they, and it's human nature in the sense that, hey, we don't want to point out our weaknesses or things we don't do well. And yet on the other hand, if you don't point them out, then investors are very astute. They're going to likely be able to figure that out. And so if you have, whether it's flaws, and I say flaws, but let's say you don't have the right person on your team, but as you're pointing it out, this is what we're doing with the investment dollars. We're going to get that one person, that key person we're missing. Or, hey, we've got a great technology, but we need to upgrade, and I'm just making it up. We need to upgrade our servers or technology to really compete, or whatever that flaw is. It's as long as it's fixable and addressable. Should you just hit that head on and tackle it? Should you skirt over it and wait and see if the investors, catch on to it? Or how do you address flaws, things that need to be fixed or made better in the business?
You should never skirt over it. And you should be as specific with the use of funds as you can. If you have to increase your server capacity, you tell them that. You don't say general corporate purposes. You say, we need to buy servers, or we need to, hire these people and that people. The more specific you can be, about how you're going to spend the money, and also the help that you need. Most investors that are engaged are going to help you with recruiting, are going to help you with business development, connections. And, what you should be doing is choosing investors that give you more than just money. If you need to talk to somebody at Microsoft and the VC used to work at Microsoft and has a great Microsoft network, you should tell them that. You should say, the reason I would rather take your money than the other guy's money is because I really need a connection at Microsoft. The more you can tell the investor what you need besides money, and the more that fits with what they can deliver, the better the partnership is going to be.
No, and I think that certainly makes sense. Of, hey, this is why I come to you, or I'm choosing you, and and I, in some sense, letting the investor know didn't choose you at random, or I'm not just pitching to everybody will open the door, but no, I have a reason why you make sense and why you fit, and not just need money just for the sake of money, but hey, you can offer this, and I think that your involvement will also help to build the company. Is, I think, an important thing to hit on. Well, I've peppered you with.
It really is.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it really is. And the best investors, that's what they do. They know that it's a team effort. And the other thing, I ask all of my CEOs to tell me a story about a time that they failed at something, and what if they can't think of any time they failed, I pass. Everybody's failed at something, and they're lying. And if they, talk about the failure and blame it on somebody else, another company, the economic environment, the pandemic, whatever, I also pass, because that person doesn't take responsibility for their own actions. But if they have a convincing story of where they learned something, where they are now smarter because of the failure. One of the companies I invested in is in the HR space, and they were selling HR software to enterprise customers. In the pandemic, they were doing about $1 million a month. In the pandemic started, their revenue went to zero in 1 month. All of the HR, all of the enterprises basically said, we're not hiring. We don't know what to do. We're basically not hiring. And so the CEO had a choice. She could have said, oh, well, whoops, here's, we're done. But she pivoted and she started selling HR interview, practice interviews to high value candidates, like expensive coders and things like that. Pivoted the business around to be services for people looking for jobs and looking to change careers. And within 2 months, she was doing more revenue direct to consumer than she was from HR companies. Here's a CEO who has proven that they can pivot and respond and not throw up their arms when things happen. And things are always going to happen in startups. Things are going to come out of left field like a pandemic. Things are going to, that first customer who strung you along is not going to sign the deal. And what you want is CEOs and management teams that are resilient and, know how to keep moving when disaster strikes. And they have to be able to explain how they did that in the past, because it's going to happen in the future.
No, and I completely agree. Whether it's, whether it's COVID, whether it's 2008 with the housing crash, whether it's a .com bubble, whether it's anything, you're going to have things that are unexpected, and you've either got to figure out how to be profitable and build a business in spite of that, or you're never going to be able, I think, a long-term business. Now, one question, and we have a lot more questions, and we're getting towards the end of the podcast, but I'll ask you what my final question, which is, so if you are a business, let's say you are building it and you've had to pivot, how do you, and you're now, you're saying, or let me rephrase, you're going to have to pivot, or you think you're going to have to pivot, and yet now you're going to have to go back to the investors and say, what we had planned on, what we were going to do just isn't working. COVID hit or whatever it is that, how do you approach an investor and say, we're going to have to change what we sold you on isn't what we're going to be able to do. How, we got to pivot. We have to adjust. How do you kind of raise that issue with investors that have already given you money based on something that you've already sold, you've already sold them on an idea?
You do it as soon as you can. Because the whole point is, I started a company once. I raised $5 million. I spent $1.5 million building a product that I thought would work. I realized it would not work. I immediately went, rather than keeping banging my head, I immediately went to the investors and said that didn't work. And I don't think it's going to work. And they said, okay, you have $3.5 million left. I go, do you want your 3.5 back, or do you want me to try something else? And they said, we want you to try something else. And, but you have to have that conversation. You have to be honest with them. If you really, they're not going to know. The CEO has to say, this is what's going on. If you have made first of all, before you make a pivot, you get buy-in from the investors. Because if you pivot without telling them, they're going to be really pissed off. Most investors will understand, and that's what they want. One of the most famous stories was, Hotmail. Hotmail was, I forget their original pitch. They went around the valley pitching, I think it was advertising or something, but it turned out that cloud-based email, which is what Hotmail was, the first one, was the real product there, not whether an advertising platform. And so it turned out that that just simply doing your email in the cloud was, that people, they didn't really want the ads targeted at them, because of their email context. So, most startups pivot, but the CEO has to be honest with the investors and tell them as soon as he knows, and get their buy-in on the pivot. And usually they'll let you keep going because that's what they did. They invested in you to find the right way and to respond as the market goes, and to, change the product as appropriate. Very, very few startups that I've invested in ended up making money on the plan that I funded in the beginning. It's usually some combination pivot, something that where they got smarter over time, and what came out was actually better than what they thought because they'd engaged in the market for some time. So this is not unusual, but CEOs that try to hide that, I can think of Theranos. I can think of, there's a lot of companies where the CEO, when the thing isn't working, end up lying to the investors. That's a very, very bad end.
No, and I completely agree. And I mean, you can get examples of Netflix. Everybody knows Netflix. Netflix, first of all, started by selling DVDs in the mail, and then they shifted to, or DVDs in the mail, and then they had to say, well, we can't do this forever. We're going to have to pivot to streaming, and then they go from streaming to subscribe. I mean, they had to do it. And you take, as an example, Uber, which is another big company. They started with black taxi, or black cab drivers, black cabs that are the luxury cabs. And then they said, okay, we've got to shift because we're getting outdone by, some of the other competition. And so they shifted their business model to what it is today of now doing ride sharing. And I think that, to your point, there's going to be those pivots. Yep.
Yeah. And delivering food and all these other things, which became opportunities as they grew and as they added. And that's what you want. You want the CEO to keep going after the growth areas, even if the first area that he thought of was not, where it ended up, being. Yeah.
So we could chat. And I'm sure this is an area I find fascinating and fun to chat about, but unfortunately, we're reaching towards the end of the podcast, and there's always more things I want to talk about than time to talk about them. But if people wanted to reach out to you, whether they want to pitch you for an investment that qualifies for what you're doing, they want to pick your brain about a little bit more about how to set themselves up for success, hear about the rest of your advice and your story, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, they want to reach out to you, what's the best way to contact or connect with you?
Just go to my website, and that's incisive.vc, INCISIVE.vc. I post all my themes up there, what I invest in, the stage I like to invest in. There's a contact form. And I would love to hear from any entrepreneurs that are incredibly passionate about a personal problem that they've had that they think lots of other people share, and they want to create a profitable, fast-growing company doing that. So I would love to talk to any entrepreneurs and other, VCs that have companies that want additional financing. I'm very excited about everything related to technology.
All right. Well, I definitely invite everybody to take you up, reach out, check out the website, get in contact, and who knows, maybe somebody will have the next great idea and you'll be the one that found them. So, well, thank you again, Martin, for coming on. It's been it's been a pleasure. Now, if you're a listener and you are either you're an expert and you want to share your expertise, or you're a startup founder or co-founder and you want to share your journey, feel free to go to inventivejourneyguest.com, apply to be on the podcast. Love to have you. If you're a listener, and you make sure to click subscribe so you get notifications as all the new awesome episodes come out. And last but not least, if you ever need help with patents and trademarks, feel free to go or reach out to us at Miller IP Law. Just go to strategymeeting.com, and we're always here to help. Thank you again, Martin. It's been a pleasure, and appreciate you having me on.
Thank you, Devin. Happy holidays.